We now want to open up to discussion, and hopefully we're also going to invite the contributors to be able to be part of this as well. So we do have a really good showing from the book participants. So do we have any questions either from the audience or for people online as well? There should be a Q&A function that people can put comments in if you would like. Martin, thank you.
Pretty well done on the book. I don't know if people can hear me. Zoom around. But I've got kind of two questions. One's a kind of jokey question about the great cover. Can you tell us about the great cover of the book? That's you were saying about the British chapter playing with kind of presentation of things, and actually the problem of the book, not the book, I guess, is the publisher. My other question was really about time. I was struck by some of the illustrations that you've kind of fallen into the trap of the city at night. In terms of the kind of aesthetics of it, is that something that you deal with, the kind of time of day or the time of year when people, certain looks to cities are very appealing or lots of people time of day? And then the temporality kind of issue, going to ask as well about the technology over time. I don't know what historical stuff on Manchester, and it's so different when you get colour photography of Manchester as opposed to black and white photography. It's the same street, the same building, but the kind of the impact of colour on our aesthetic. Again, people choose even contemporary photography in black and white because it evokes some kind of aesthetics. It's just that time.
No, thank you, Martin. And just to paraphrase for people online as well, so you can hear, Martin Dodge's question in the audience was firstly around the book cover and linking the book cover to the question of aesthetics and the argument that we have in the book. So I think Amy and I can probably handle that one in a moment. And then the second one was around some of the images that were used in the presentation and how they reflected certain tropes of the city, in particular thinking about the city at night as it was represented in some of those images. And I think there was a related point there about temporality and the question of temporality as it might relate to aesthetics. Is that fair, Martin? Yeah, thank you. So do you want to?
No, I was just going to say it was about the use of photography, wasn't it? And kind of colour photography versus kind of black and white photography and how that affects the aesthetics of the city. We did have a cover image that was reflective of the kaleidoscopic image of the city that you saw in the video that we shared. That's something that we did want to pursue. There are limitations, as we're aware, on what covers can be used on books. So we went with the one that we felt most closely reflected the kaleidoscopic kind of image we were trying to go with that, didn't we?
Yeah, so I think, as you heard in the conclusion that Amy gave a minute ago, the argument that we ultimately went down was that you can think of aesthetics as somewhat like a kaleidoscope when you look at the city, and different theoretical vantage points are akin to turning the kind of scope on a kaleidoscope, if you will. So we went out with a camera to Deansgate Square, which itself is quite a trope, and we took a picture through a kaleidoscope of Deansgate Square, and that was intended to be the cover, but we couldn't have that.
But we did manage to squeeze it into the video.
But it has been squeezed. It has been squeezed into the videos. As per the images in the presentation, they were the royalty-free images that were available on Pixabay when I searched for them earlier this week. But again, that says something to how the various different images and popular imaginaries of the city become folded into the way we think about it and the way we present it and kind of reproduce these notions through digital means. But again, just to open that question up to either people online or to Monica, if you want to say something further about the role of images of the city, or indeed the related question about temporality that I don't think we've fully handled there in terms of how aesthetics relates to temporality.
Yeah, if it's all right, I would just like to comment on other chapters when it with regard to the question about visual representations. I mean, I fully acknowledge the limitations of working with certain publishers, and that's just the reality. But I think one of the things that I find particularly interesting when I read some of the other chapters is that there is not, that sounds very counterintuitive maybe, but there are not a lot of images in the book. And I think there's a value in that actually, because when we talk about aesthetics, we have a kind of like dominance of the visual sense usually, and of visual representations of the city. There's a kind of like legacy in Western thought, in Western urban studies, that the visual sense kind of like dominates all other senses. And in many ways, the kind of like lack of visual representations, or of not too many visual representations, opens up a space actually for not only kind of like giving value to other senses, but also giving value to what Julian, for example, described as the sixth sense, or to add to forms of knowledge production that are linked to but are not limited just to a particular sense.
Thank you, Gunther. Monica, we turn to yourself.
Yeah, just about the temple. I think it's like I always think of the aesthetic as temple spatial embodied. That these are three axes that are constantly working together. We cannot think of place, space without time, and time without space and experience, etc. I think it's key to see them constantly together. And in terms of colors and time, I think, like, I don't know about I'm not expert in photography, but jazz pictures are always black and white. Whereas, the mundane everyday is more in color and represented, etc. What I find interesting when I do ask local people about the color of the neighborhood or the street, there is a common aesthetic sense of color that is linked to the temporal experience of retail. It's quite interesting to see how people describe their high street according to very, rainbow colors or black and white or gray, etc. And that again links to the emotional. So that I think there needs to be much more research then. I think Tim Evans has done some into color and Gillian Rose, but I think there's so much more to say about how we perceive color and the role it plays in our experience of the city. And then last story is I've just seen the film again for the 10th time, Collateral, with Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx. It's in LA, it's always at night, and it's interesting how certain cities like LA, New York are so often portrayed through nighttime. And I don't know, I love that movie, but it made me think a lot about what you said, that everything is, shown at night, and it creates this much more, cinematic kind of impact than the ordinary daytime.
It's worth also mentioning Selay Levanka's chapter. I don't think has been able to join us online. It's probably the one chapter that had absolutely tons of images, but did a fabulous job of actually working against some of those tropes of the city in doing so. I think in terms of centering the focus on people like street cleaners, which was one of the things that her chapter focused on. So yeah, thank you in terms of that. Thank you, Martin, for that question. Are there any other questions in the room or online, if anyone's got them too?
If I may, I would like to add something to that, a thought to that. Also, first of all, thank you very much for this book launch, for organizing the book launch, and also for being part of the collective volume. Was my first time to be part as a writer in a collective volume, so it was very special for me. So also in the in the notion of, or in the notion of keeping up the conflictuality of of aesthetics, of our understanding of aesthetics, I would like to add to this, this trope and this idea of the city at night as something that is romanticizing also our idea of the city. I think that has very much to do with lived experience in the city, because depending on who thinks of the city at night, it might be not such a romantic place. So also from a queer feminist perspective, for people who are read as female bodies, it might not be a very, safe or comfortable space, a cityscape at night. So yeah, it's not really a question, it's just a comment to to keep up this discussion of how we pursue and also approach these also interstices, these like urban interstices where we're moving. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on that, or are there any other questions from the audience? Neve, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for such a wonderful presentation. Congrats to everybody. I'm sure it's a fantastic read. I noticed it's quite an interdisciplinary group with people from all over the world and all different disciplines. I was just wondering what you learned from each other, like as you were editing the book or creating and collaborating with each other, as you're like working with.
That is a really, really good question.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
fantastic.
That's
Thank
such a
you.
thoughtful question.
Yeah. I think actually for me that was where the central argument of the book came from. Like, so we had an idea of kind of what, you know, how we understood aesthetics, what, you know, we had a sense of where we wanted to go with the book after having the RC21 conference session where all the contributors attended. And it was really in hearing the absolute diversity of ways that different people interpreted aesthetics, that we thought, you know, at first we thought it's a bit unruly, like how are we going to get, you know, like make an argument out of this? And I actually thought, well, the value really comes from the difference, from the different perspectives. And I think the different case studies as well help to shine a light on that. You know, we had kind of Josh's chapter focusing on embodied kind of bicycle careers, and then people looking at cleanliness and branding practices. And it was really interesting to see just the diversity of approaches and then how they were put on to make sense of different case studies. And I think that's where the argument came from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to reiterate for people online, I think they had trouble hearing the question there. But this was, you know, we are a very diverse group of scholars, both from discipline or where we've come from in the world and our various different backgrounds. So the question was, what did we learn from each other through the process of doing the book? I don't know if anyone's got any further immediate reflections as to what Amy said. I mean, I certainly learned how good of a writer you all are. It was impressive. It was impressive to see the quality of stuff that was coming through, as you know, in terms of draft form. So yeah, that was quite a thing.
Why did you focus on aesthetics initially? Because we met at a conference where you had a special session on it, and I was really happy to see it. But I thought, oh, I wrote about it in 2005, 8, you know, etc. And I'm so happy that people are picking it up, you know, finally properly, and that you've created this amazing edited book. But what made you really interested in that?
Thank you. So again, Monica's question there for people online was what made us interested in this concept in terms of the initial conference call and then the want to write the book up later. I think we wanted to work together for a while, but we come from very different corners of the discipline. So, I mean, my interests are in post-foundational political theory, in particular Rancière's thought and his kind of strain of aesthetics, which is fairly unique, I think it's fair to say, with maybe the exception of Aaron. There's a kind of similarity. Amy, I don't speak for your background.
Then I come from more of kind of a social and cultural geography perspective, looking at things more like embodiment, the senses, thinking from more than representational vantage point. And I think often when we were talking about our own works, kind of trying to make sense of what on earth we're going to write next and things like that, we always felt like there was an underlying thread, like we were talking in the same way, but there wasn't really a word that kind of synthesized or brought our work together. And I think we really felt like aesthetics as a concept allowed us to kind of bring together these different perspectives. And I think the book really functioned as an extension of that and really broadened that out. So it was actually from just kind of curiosity of bringing our own work together that then we were able to expand out and bring all you guys together as well, which I think actually worked really quite nicely in the end.
I think also having written a paper on scale, which I think has countless times been called a chaotic concept, I kind of looked at aesthetics and saw a very, very similar thing. But I also saw a very different behavior from the scholars within that community and who were using aesthetics. So whereas scale, I think as a concept was something that people had kind of argued about, aesthetics was being treated quite respectfully as a concept where there are different lineages, different understandings, but nonetheless where people can come together and have a conversation with it and through it. And I felt like that was a bit of an opening for the book. And that quite neatly fits in terms of that kind of common ground that we were talking about earlier, and that I see in terms of the book and all the different contributors that are part of it.
I think as well as a concept, it's often there kind of implicitly in a lot of work, but it's not really always articulated as aesthetics. And I think it was a way of kind of bringing different voices together, wasn't it? And kind of thinking, well, what happens if we do pull forward the aesthetic strand of that work? What different arguments can we kind of shine on the city, and in particular on kind of these urban arguments we were presenting?
So I wrote down a question in case no one asked a question a little bit earlier, and that actually maps really nicely on it. So I'd quite like to ask that as the last question to the contributors online, and to yourself, Monica, if that's okay, and Amy as well, if you want to chip in. It relates to what I've just been talking about. That aesthetics, if you think of it, is quite a loose concept. It has this common kind of core in terms of something relating to sense making. You know, we might be able to roughly categorize ourselves in terms of thinking about aesthesis as that more kind of immediate sense-making process, and kind of sensus communis, the kind of common sense strain of it. But of course, it is a loose concept. We all work in very, very different ways. And it's been great to work together with everyone working on this book. So my question is, how do we work together moving forwards when we approach it from such different vantage points? How do we keep that momentum going and to turn it into whatever the next thing is for us as a kind of community of scholars? Yeah. Monica, yeah?
For me personally, and I'm reaching, you know, towards the end of my career, I would say, I would like policy to take it seriously. I've been trying to do it myself, and I hope that others take over the baton, and that planning, but also, you know, not just planners, but councillors, politicians, start really focusing seriously on how it shapes society and what a political instrument it is, positively, but also, of course, used negatively a lot.
Thank you. So just to reiterate for people online, Monica's comment there was about getting policymakers to take the concept seriously, and I think maybe that's a kind of common ground that we could all hook onto in terms of thinking about the real world implications of aesthetics, however we might approach it. Anyone else want to say something on this?
I can share something a little bit similar to what Monica said, and this actually stems from my background coming from the Middle East, because from Cairo we tend to have a sort of like a very sharp urban transformations that's been happening in the past maybe 10 years, and it has become very like it transformed to a sort of like a new liberal contemporary kind of city. So the actually traditional kind of image or the visual culture, the traditional visual culture of Cairo is kind of dissolving in a way. And that transition, we are still comprehending this kind of transition. And I think if we, for urbanists and architects and urban researchers and theorists to comprehend the concept of aesthetics and all the branches related to aesthetics, if we're talking about perception, of movement, of historical residue, of transformation, of urban morphology, all sorts of theoretical notions of aesthetics, if it can be implemented within the work of urbanists and architects, I think it could have a sort of like an interdisciplinary kind of framework of the work that can be applied to cities. Yeah, I think this is basically this is actually the perks of the term being loose and being and having, you know, I wouldn't say tangible element, but it has a sort of like you know, several approaches to it. I think this is a very positive outlook on it.
Thank you to hear, and I hope that arm's feeling better as well. It's nice to see the cast has been removed.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's removed now.
Gunther, did you want to come in? We'll have you as the last comment on this.
Oh, okay. So it has to be a good one then. Okay. I would say many of a lot of our work, and I definitely include myself in that, rely on very particular Western concept of aesthetic or approach to aesthetics, and one that kind of like we go back to the origins, 18th century Enlightenment and so on, but very much kind of like only making maybe small attempts to decolonize aesthetics and the concept of aesthetics. So maybe now that we have learned a lot about aesthetics in the city, maybe the next project is about unlearning a lot of the things that we have learned and questioning the concept and the approaches that we have internalized and normalized maybe as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, everyone. I really, really appreciate it. So I'm just going to briefly share the slides again so we can have the closing slides. So thank you all so much for coming, especially as well to the people in the room. I appreciate you've taken time of your day to be here, and thank you to the people online as well. Just a few words of thanks before finishing. So first of all, thank you to all of the contributors for your wonderful chapters. And also for coming today, and Monica for coming in person, and all the time that's gone into producing your videos. We also want to thank Kevin Ward and Sarah Hall, who provided feedback on the introduction chapter to us a little bit earlier on in the process, but also the Cities, Politics, Economies Research Group, who also, I think they read the book proposal at one point. Also to Routledge for their editorial support, to MUI, CPE, and of course to Martin for help with organisation, to the department for their help with funding for the video that you saw at the start of the presentation, to the school, SEED, because they helped to fund a workshop that was formative to the book, and of course to everyone that's come to listen today, not least because for those of us in geography, we're very close to dissertation marking. So thank you very much, everyone. And thanks again to the people online. And yeah, thank you for coming. I hope you have a great evening. There's some tea and coffee outside if you'd like to help yourselves. Thank you.